Dear participants to the SDG Action Zone, my name is Vic Van Vuuren and I'm the Director of the Enterprises Department at the International Labour Organization. My co-moderator today is Ms. Archana Soreng, the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group representative on climate change. I'm pleased to welcome you all to our session with the theme Building Back Better, Decent Work Solutions for a Just Transition. Decent work is not just a goal, it is a driver of sustainable development, while just transition, on the other hand, maximizes opportunities for new job creation while minimizing social disruption, leaving no one behind. At our session today, we will focus on this objective, and we have a number of panelists who Archana will introduce, but I have the pleasure now to introduce our distinguished speakers who will come in later in the program. Mr. Ryder, the Director General of the ILO, Mr. Roberto Suarez, the Secretary General of the International Organization of Employers, the IOE, and Ms. Sharan Burrow, the General Secretary, International Trade Union Confederation, ITUC. I now turn to Ms. Archana Soreng to take us into the next segment of the session. Over to you, Archana.
Thank you, Mr. Vic Van Vuuren, for opening our intergenerational dialogue in the SDG Action Zone on building back better, decent work solution for a just transition. The COVID pandemic has led a bear that healthy life, labor markets, and productive economies depend on healthy environment. And as you rightly said, decent work is not just a goal, it is a driver of sustainable development. More people in decent jobs means stronger and more inclusive economic growth. So as today we are discussing about decent works and just transition, we have amongst us my colleague from the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. We have Mr. Vladislav Kaim from Moldova. We have Ms. Nisreen Elsaim from Sudan. And we have Ms. Paloma Costa from Brazil. So I welcome them all for this intergenerational dialogue, and let us hear from them their concerns and perspectives on building back better, decent work solution for a just transition. I now request Mr. Vladislav Kaim to share his thoughts and perspectives.
Thank you very much, Archana. Dear Excellencies and colleagues, it is a great pleasure to be here. In my case, it's already for the second year in a row, and it is great to see that the ILO is the organization and the platform that puts in front of us tough but right questions fit for the COVID and post-COVID era alike. One of the main questions of that era, of course, will be what a just transition looks like and what do decent jobs look like. It wouldn't be surprising to hear from me that for the Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change, the main priority for decent jobs agenda is the agenda of green jobs. We strongly consider that a just transition that will facilitate sustainable recovery post-COVID primarily involves a greater opportunity for youth and adults alike to find themselves in green jobs. Unfortunately, we notice some serious structural barriers that still impede us from achieving that goal. Firstly, I would like to underline that youth who has suffered a lot economically from the consequences of the pandemic is in the midst of many anxieties. Healthcare anxieties, job anxiety, and climate anxiety. But at the same time, youth wants to be engaged in the work with purpose, and climate action is one example of such purpose. Unfortunately, there are very few pathways for them to obtain actual marketable skills within their educational frameworks to be ready for the world of green jobs. In many countries, the taxonomy of green jobs is not even well defined. And that is a structural barrier that will be required to overcome in order for us to proceed with the just transition agenda. Secondly, I would also like to focus our attention on the fact that in our quest for green jobs, we will need to reimagine not just the workplaces for them to be also green or for the job tasks to be green, but also the social insurance and social contract systems that would underpin that green jobs ecosystem. We need a new social contract for decent green jobs, and ILO serves as a great platform to facilitate exactly that type of a discussion. And with that, I would like to conclude by addressing the Director General Ryder with a question on how do you and the ILO see the reformed social contract and the social welfare policies for the green jobs of the future that will allow us to avoid the mistakes that were committed in this COVID era that led to loss of prosperity, particularly for the most vulnerable populations. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr.
Hello, can I thank Vladislav for the question. Greetings to all participants. The first thing I want to say is to make very clear that the ILO understands and is acting upon the realization that our decent work agenda has to place green jobs at its heart. This is, I think, an argument which has been accepted in the organization. And yes, the COVID-19 pandemic has revealed extraordinary inequalities, vulnerabilities, and precariousness in the world of work, of which youth are particular victims. And one of the things that makes this all the more serious is the inadequacies, the glaring inadequacies of our current social protection arrangements. Half of the global population has no social protection whatsoever. Less than 1 in 3 have anything like comprehensive social protection. And this matters enormously when it comes to just transition towards the sustainable green economy of the future. Because just as COVID-19 places people under threat, the direct health threat, but also the vulnerabilities that arise from the policies that we necessarily must take to stop the pandemic, well, so it is with climate change. We need to protect people against the direct impact of climate change, be it drought, be it flooding, be it heat stress, but we also have to make sure that they are helped through the adjustments that will be inherent in the move towards a sustainable green economy. And that's exactly, of course, where social protection comes in. So what do we need to do? What does our social protection initiative need to look like? Well, it needs to be rights-based, accepting social protection as a right. And we really need to be comprehensive. That is to say, we have to reach all sectors of the population, the working population. I think particularly, Vladislav, of the informal economy, the sorts of settings in which, for example, farmers, fishers, forestry workers are engaged, where social protection is often extremely weak. I would just want to point to 4 areas which I think our social protection efforts need to address. Firstly, I think we need to look at the implementation of cash transfer programs which bring immediate assistance to people. They need to be flexible, they need to be scalable to afford coverage to affected groups in very, very immediate and important ways. Secondly, we need to put an emphasis on unemployment protection and factor those into countries' overall national climate agenda. People will be made unemployed. People will have to move from one place to the next, and we need to protect them and help them to do so. And that means as well, and this is my third point, complementing income support with the types of active labour market policies which enable people to retrain, to gather the new skills that will be important in the green economy, help place people through public employment services in new parts of the labour market. And the fourth point I want to make is the very basic importance of health benefit packages, so obvious in the COVID-19 era, but equally so in the face of climate change. And to conclude, dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. All of our experience tells us that social protection systems are better when they are the result of dialogue between the interested parties, governments, employers, and workers. And lastly, let's not think that first we recover from COVID and then we start going green. We have to build our green jobs agenda into the process of recovery. Not sequential processes, but simultaneous. I hand it back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guy Ryder, Director General ILO, and Mr. Vladislav Kaim, for rightly emphasizing that why green jobs and green economy needs to be an integral part of our policy making and decision making. Now I request Ms. Nisreen Elsaim to share her thoughts.
Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon for everyone. Depends on the time zone you are following us from. My question is going to be for Mrs. Sharan Burrow. And because we know that the trade unions are one of the institutes that actually came out from the people and actually is there for serving people also. So it's one of the unique institutions that actually deals directly with young people, with trade unions and other people in the ground roots. And it's very important for us at the Youth Advisory Group for the Secretary General on the climate change, and also as a young climate advocate, to actually make access to these trade unions around the world, in their countries, in different regions, in order to formalize the concept of climate change to them, and also to reach out and listen to them, to their issues, to their plans, to what they think, what is their concept of green recovery, because different people have different concepts and different understanding for different phrases. So green recovery and green jobs are different for different people, and trade unions are not like exemptions from that. And also, I know that you are coming from a long history of trade unions. So your great-grandfather was also a trade union. And I'm also coming from a long history climate activist or environmental activist family. So my grandmother was an environmental activist, my mother, and also me. So I'm the third generation. It's very important. What I noticed from my grandmother experience and my mother experience is passing the knowledge to the upcoming generation, not to repeat the same mistakes and not to fall in the same traps. And let me say, to start from what people actually ended instead of starting from the beginning all the time. So we were really looking to listen for the very much rich experience you had from your family and from your own experience on how to access young trade unions around the world, in talking about green recovery, in talking about climate change and the sequences of that, and also your message to the young people around the world, especially the young trade unions in different countries, specifically countries that actually have long issues with trade unions, like my country, Sudan, for example, in how to set a goal for the trade union and how to make it a really green recovery after the COVID-19, and how us as a young people and young climate advocates can actually formalize the concept of climate change for them and access them without barriers. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Nisreen. And I'm honored to meet you, can I say, and your colleagues, because I'm a huge fan of intergenerational dialogues. We started them within the global union movement. And I characterized the context of the struggle we're in as the struggle of generations, because to build a just and sustainable future, so we have a living planet, we have people where social justice is based on decent work, as Guy said, and social protection. This is going to take all of us, and it will require us to work across all of the sectors. So I'm honored that you asked me with Guy and indeed with Roberto from the employers, because we need all to understand the future's in our hands, but it's in your hands, not just the old folk like us. So I not only am honored that you're here, I want to meet with you or talk to you in this crazy virtual world. So I'm going to ask Vic to make sure that you get my details, because, you know, we have a great deal of hope for Sudan. We know the conflict that you have been through. We know the problems that every day my colleagues talk to me about, you know, the advances and the sort of step backs that are there for civil society and unions in Sudan. So the ILO, of course, has an oversight on this as well, but for me, it would be fantastic to join you up to some of our advocates and leaders in Africa. And indeed, I would like to make sure that we know you as well, and your colleagues, by the way. That extends to the others. Let me talk to you about, as Guy did, about the struggle as we see it. Before COVID-19, we actually had a convergence of crisis where you had massive inequalities within and between nations. Income inequality was driving an age of despair and anger, and you saw civil unrest outside of conflict zones in almost every continent because people couldn't earn enough money to live on and they didn't have universal social protection. So survival is actually driving desperation. I can tell you from our recent global poll that 75% of the world's people tell us their incomes have stagnated or gone backwards. That puts fear into people, particularly when you add the kind of unemployment levels we had not just before with a segmented labour market, but in fact now as a result of COVID-19. So jobs, jobs and jobs have to be at the heart of recovery. So does social protection. But the convergence factor that we don't often talk about in inequality was also race and gender. So for young women like you on the global stage, for all of those, ethnicity factors that say people have been discriminated or excluded, we're a movement of all colours, all religions, all ages. And so we see it on a daily basis. So income, yes, race, yes, and gender, of course. In that context, you have to marry that, though, with a convergence of climate. There's a climate emergency. This has been a very difficult debate for our constituency, good jobs in fossil fuels and other damaging environmental industries. But every sector has to make the transition, every sector without question. So we fought and won the concept of just transition, which, as Vic said, is basically leave no one behind. The ILO has the support of the employers through the IOE with Roberto and us through the trade unions on just transition and just transition guidelines. And now a council, a global council with the UN and the ILO and the rest of us supporting the notion of green jobs and how you invest in green jobs. So for us, climate and employment underpinned by social protection with the inclusion of women, of everybody on the planet. This is what a future that's about justice will look like. So the SDGs, financing the SDGs everywhere, the Paris Agreement, these two things together for us are a pathway to zero poverty, zero carbon. And if that's the roadmap, how do we get there? Well, we demand a new social contract for recovery and resilience. And indeed, in that new social contract, the ILO Centenary Declaration is a very good base because it focuses on the labour protection flaw every worker should have. Whether you're in the 60% tragically who work in the informal sector with no rights, no minimum wages, no social protection, we need to fix that. Or in the 40% who are seeing the security of their work break down, even in formal employment, as you see the intersection of internet-mediated jobs and many other forms of employment. So putting a labour protection flaw, fundamental rights, maximum hours of work, an adequate minimum wage, a wage on which you can live with, and occupational health and safety as a fundamental right. These, for us, give people hope, protection, and security, and the freedom to act as with a collective voice. If you partner or marry that with universal social protection, and we're currently fighting for a global social protection fund for the most vulnerable, it's unconscionable that 70% of the world's people don't have social protection. This is income, health, and other areas. But if you think about the security for workers, for their families, for business, and Roberto and I again agree on this, we need social protection. And then if we have a transformative agenda for women and just transition for climate and indeed technology, that gets us a long way towards the hope of a secure and a just future. So for us, when the UN talks about building back better, we say constructing an inclusive economic model that's very different, reforming multilateralism, looking at how we play into the future. I can tell you that Ryder heads the most powerful institution for workers and employers in the globe because it's unique. We have a dialogue across the three areas, tripartitism, we call it. And so let's take that tripartitism to the next generations. Well, not just the next generation, generations down to your age, because I just say this, if we're going to get a new social contract, if we're going to realize that zero poverty, zero carbon world that you have an ambition for, your colleagues, that I'm passionate about, as all of the people here, we need it to be a struggle of the generations in partnership. So this dialogue is a great start, Vic. Let's keep it going.
Thank you, Ms. Sharan Burrow, General Secretary, International Trade Union Confederation, and Ms. Nisreen Elsaim. This has been an enriching sharing of your thoughts, and as I could capture it is like hope, protection, security, inclusivity, and social protection for everyone. Thank you for sharing this. Now I would request Ms. Paloma Costa from Brazil to share her thoughts.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Archana. Thank you, Your Excellencies. I'm going to address my question for Mr. Roberto Suarez from UE. Well, as Archana said, I come from a region where my people is the actual outcome of this dominant paradigm of development. An economic model that we insist that sustain our nations, but is not sustainable at all, especially if you see from a perspective of someone from Latin America. And according to the latest ILO study, workers in the Americas have suffered most from the economic fallout for the pandemic. And this data coincides with WHO indications of Latin American infection epicenter. Well, we've been the exploitation epicenter for a long time from now. And if there is something that we are here, is that we are resilient. From a regional perspective, the Americas labor market suffers the most. And with the high price of the rice and the need of years and years of experience, impossible goal for a youth, to apply for a formal and decent job, we have no way out than coming up with impressive ideas to just survive to all of this. And the challenge is even worse for my friends in the communities and on the territories. Imagine if you are a woman in there, as Archana. For their own safety, they had to declare self-isolation due to the COVID and the vulnerability to infection disease. And with no school, no jobs, no incomes, and the recession, what will keep them from entering on informal jobs to help sustain their families, making them even more vulnerable? And according to the ILO report, most people in developing countries works in the informal sector. And also the ILO's Convention 169 is categorical when it comes to the consultation of indigenous and traditional communities. And they are overrepresented in these formal spaces. Same as for the youth, we don't have a voice. And the numbers are stunning. More than 1 in 6 young people are out of work due to the COVID-19, higher than any other group. So when will our struggles become a global fight? When there are initiatives to keep the youth in the territories, protecting the legacy given by the elders, making a service for humanity by preserving our forests, building a valuable chain that in all of this process will get the necessary support. It is vital to include young people, otherwise we are damaging the future for all of us. So that's why I ask, how does the IOE plan to push, use, and incorporate our own youth initiatives, energy, and talents into formal jobs in a way that contributes to counteracting the triple effects of COVID, climate emergence, and massive biodiversity loss, recovering with good practice, sustainable one, real sustainable ones, that contributes to reforestate our collective conscience, shaping us into a better future and society that puts lives and human dignity in the center of all discussions.
So, Paloma, let me refer to how we see the scenario right now, okay? Without entering into the negativism, which is very tempting, because I have to recognize, we have to recognize as business community that the signs are not precisely positive, okay? So we have a pandemic, and I want to stress something on this pandemic. This pandemic is the most global pandemic you have ever had. I mean, in the past, in the history of humankind, you have already have many, and we'll have more. But this is the one in which you can see that all regions in the world, all of a sudden, are suffering from a health pandemic, which also has devastating, and we use this word in a common statement that Sharan and myself signed, devastating social, economic consequences. And when we say devastating, you are from Brazil, you're referring to informality, you know better than us how difficult it is for someone who's living in informality to save her incomes. I mean, that's really, I mean, let's recognize it's worsening in this situation there, okay? At the same time, what we have not been able to provide, and we have to recognize, IOE as a global business community, we recognize, and sometimes it's not easy because of our membership is very diverse, but we have not been able to provide global answers. I mean, part of the problems that we have right now are also linked to the fact that we have climate change challenges. We have also the previous financial crisis, but the answers were not collectively global, I would say. So the challenge that we have now, and Guy referred to that, and that's in the public opinion now, in the international public opinion, in your country. Well, we'll have a situation in Brazil where you will have an unemployment rate growing. You will have, so the first thing we have to do is to save and recover the economy. And then we'll see what we can do also with the green engagement that we have. And that's, from my humble perspective, a big mistake. There are already important surveys which says if there is anything positive from this pandemic is that it can help to resettle the way we do things, okay? And let's not be also totally negative. There were much progress on many areas, okay? But if there is any area where we did not make any progress, you refer to that, this is the fact that 60% of the occupied population, and we keep repeating that, is in the informal sector. In the case of Brazil, is higher, and many countries in Latin America can go up at the 70%. There you don't have social protection, Sharan was referring to that. There you don't have decent work as we know it. And let's recognize that in this informal sector, what you have in Latin America is a youth component which is very vibrant, and many young people trying to survive, also with their own means, some of them as entrepreneurs, and with no support at all. So for us, it's critical. If you want to talk about quick recovery and quick green recovery, you need to focus on this informal sector very much, which is not the ambition that we have put by now. There's progress in some areas. I mean, I would say in child labor, also on forced labor. In some countries, you can see some progress on, perhaps on some fundamental, but on the informal economy, aspects as such, you don't see substantial progress. This has been keeping growing for the last, and that's damaging any green recovery also. So that's where we think the ambition has to be put. And there we have the aspect of how you provide what we call the just transitions. At the end of the day, we have data from the ILO, important data, and also for other institutions, we say we'll have important opportunities. It's not just that 1.47 billion jobs are affected by sustainability challenges for climate change, etc. It's also the fact that you have important jobs opportunities out of it. And there are different numbers. I mean, some people, I think the ILO gave the figure of 24 million new jobs that can be created through circular economy and sustainable. But at the end of the day, you will never get there with these new opportunities if you do not promote transitions. In the mining sector, in the financial sector, in the agricultural sector, if you don't provide the young people with the skills, the technical skills that are needed quick to make the change, you will never get there. So on one side, you need to create these solid institutions, much better, and the social protection schemes are important. But we keep saying also, you all need to help us to provide an environment for these young entrepreneurs who wants to make a business, to survive, to create a new environment. In many Latin American countries, that's an impossible task sometimes. So if we all push on the same directions, on one side, let's strengthen the sustainability of social protection schemes. Let's also push harder for incomes that are decent. But at the same time, you all help us also to create an environment for those who want to have a new business to do and to grow better, in better conditions. I think we'll have a win-win situation precisely for the just transitions. And that's linked to the skills also aspect. So that's my question, my main answer. And how we involve you, how we involve young people. I think Sharon was quite right. We need to strengthen this kind of dialogues. When we have discussions in dialogue, we are among ourselves, sometimes in our own bubble, and we need to bring you in the conversations because it's fresh air. It's also different perspectives and different mindsets. Believe me, when you talk about sustainability, you also talk about people that can learn quickly, people that also can think out of the box. And that's the way forward. I mean, there are many ways in which we can incorporate you in our discussions. And IOE, well, I can provide you examples of what we are doing. We have a youth academy, and that's helping us a lot also to change our membership. We need you there also in a much strengthened manner. So I hope that I helped to answer the question.
Thank you, Mr. Roberto, Secretary General, International Organization of Employers, and Ms. Paloma Costa for sharing your thoughts. And as Mr. Roberto rightly emphasized on informal sector, I, being from the indigenous community, I strongly feel that the forest-based livelihood of the indigenous communities can be seen as one of the way for strengthening green economy. And, encouraging more entrepreneurship of the indigenous youth will one of the way to strengthen more just transition and also decent jobs for them. So moving ahead to our next segment, request all my colleagues from the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change to give short inputs as we have very less time with us. So I request first Vladislav Kaim, and then Paloma Costa, and then Nisreen to share their last thoughts, and then we'll hand it over to Vic for further. Yes, Vlad.
Thank you very much, Archana. I am very thankful for this very insightful conversation and for dedication that all speakers have demonstrated in their speeches. I would like to emphasize the importance of the fact that in order for us to transition to the abundance in green jobs, the skilling pathways should be established as soon as possible and in as massive way as possible. That's among the few ways in which we can make sure that the generation COVID, as it was dubbed, would not be a lost generation from the point of view of income, of the environment they will live in, and so on. We need nothing less than a green youth guarantee for a green future. And that can only be made through an intergenerational, interorganizational effort. Thank you.
Yes, just want to confirm what my colleague Vlad said, and I also want to make sure that the ideas of including young people within the reform of the green recovery or the new recovery is very essential and key, not only because we are the most vulnerable, but also because we are the future, not only the future, but also the present nowadays. And because we also think outside the box, we have a lot of energies, we have a lot of professionalism point of views. So it's really important and a key for us to have inclusion of young people, not only in the activities of the green recovery, but also in the planning and in the coordination process towards that green recovery. It's also key thing for us to make sure that the concept of green recovery is actually delivered to the workers in different areas, and we should always support the green entrepreneurs and the more sustainable businesses in order to have like a safe future and a safe universal world for us. It's also important and to acknowledge that not only COVID-19, but the normal crisis from the climate change is going to affect massively the economy. So recovering the economy and saving the economy is not the first priority for us now. The first priority will be to stop the climate action crisis from happening, and then we can think of how to recover the economy, because even if we recover the economy, the climate change crisis will destroy whatever we build again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. It was a really good conversation, and I really feel inspired to hear all of you, Your Excellencies, saying about including us on the discussions, on the planning, but also on helping setting goals and addressing solutions that might be good for us to do a recovery with real and exactly green jobs. But I can't help like agree with Nisreen and on what Vlad said. When we think about saving the economy first, we are coming again to the same error on mercantilizing our lives. Our lives are not for sale. We cannot be using these as a bargain. We have to put life, dignity, and human collective welfare in the center of all discussions. I love it to hear that we need to grow together, because I think we need to grow in all the ways that these words grows mean. We need to include like real green and sustainable initiatives into formal and a path for us to have an actual and real green recovery. So I feel really inspired for being with all of you here, because I really believe we have the power to recover, to resist, and also to give opportunity for lots of talented young people around the world that are in the bases, in the front lines, coming up with solutions that could be applied in international and national level for us to overcome this situation and this triplets emergence we are facing. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much, Archana. And we come to the last segment where we're going to ask our three distinguished speakers to give a very brief comment and words of wisdom as to how we can take this forward. So I first go to Mr. Ryder for his final remarks, followed by Mr. Burrow, and then Mr. Santos, in that order, please. Very brief, and because we've just got 5 minutes to the end. Mr. Ryder.
Thanks, Vic. Well, and thanks to all participants. I agree with those who've said this has been a very valuable, very important conversation, with some unmissable messages transmitted to perhaps the older members of the conversation. Sharan said intergenerational dialogue like this is so important. And the fact of the matter is that the green jobs agenda, sustainability, is by definition an intergenerational agenda. It's in the definition of sustainability. And so, yes, we have to be responsive to this call to make sure that, that youth is brought into the conversation, not as spectators, but as actors. And when it comes to, and here I'm a little nervous, I do think we need to get our economy going again. Now, I may be disagreeing with some people here, but I don't think so. We need, given that, you know, nearly 500 million people have lost their livelihoods in the world, we need to get economic activity going again, but in ways which are, as has been argued, absolutely compatible with the survival of the planet. This is what building back differently means, and in a way which is human-centered. You know, the Centenary Declaration that the ILO adopted on the future of work last year talks precisely about a human-centered agenda for growth and development. So I think we need to take on board all of these ideas. You may be using slightly different language, but I think we're pursuing very much the same goals and the same objectives. Thanks, Vic.
Thank you. Sharan?
Thank you. And I would say, you know, we have to consider what future we want. I think Paloma's right about that. We don't want the world we had. We cannot allow the inequality and the despair to continue. So what is that future? Well, first of all, we say there are no jobs on a dead planet. So we have to build sustainability into all of the, you know, the rebuilding of the economy. And we have to build in the social justice elements that you've all talked about. We need full employment. People do need jobs, but it can't be business at any cost. It has to be businesses who are prepared to share prosperity, because there's a very simple message for me. Why do we build wealth if we're not prepared to share it? And all the evidence will show that where we share wealth through social protection, collective bargaining, you know, commitment to the SDGs in terms of those vital public services, where we share wealth across the planet, we will actually all be richer. That's why the Nordic countries are more equal than any in the world. They share their prosperity and have done so because they didn't want to remain as poor nations. But there are many good examples. I'm inspired by watching our members in the informal economy around the world, you know, actually look at how they can help each other survive, because Guy gave you the unemployment figures, but there's also about 1.6 billion people now who face destitution every day. So yes, we need international aid. Yes, we need a social protection fund, but we also need a resilience that comes from jobs, social protection, and inclusion for everybody on a sustainable footing. Together, I'm really confident we can build that.
Thank you very much. Roberto?
My main message, I think, having heard also Guy and Sharan, I think this idea of joining the effort is much more critical than ever. I mean, we cannot allow ourselves to be with a lack of coordination, but also with a lack of synergies. My main message to all of you, Paloma, Archana, Nisreen, Vladislav, is at the end of the day, if you want to make compatible this recovery with a green recovery, which is critical and shouldn't be incompatible, as Guy has said, you need creativeness. I mean, many of the solutions that you are looking at now in terms of new alternative energy, consumption partners, mobility, the digitalization, we have it there because we have people like you, young people, with some new ideas, innovation, capacity to propose. This creativity, this innovation, this capacity to set up a business sometimes it's not well preserved. So you need to fight and struggle with us. On one side, to strengthen the institutions like social protection, etc., but on the other side, to help us to preserve this capacity of create, of innovate for many of the young people who set up their own business, some of them in the informal economy, to get into the formal sector. So for me, that's the equation that will make us succeed on a sustainable pattern for the future.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to my co-moderator, Archana, and thank you to all the Youth Advisory Group, and thank you for the leadership that you're showing, the energy that you bring to the table. This is much appreciated and most welcome. Thank you to our distinguished speakers from the Workers' Employers Representation and also from the Director General of the ILO. We appreciate the time that you've given to this debate and the words of wisdom that you've imparted as to how we can work together in tackling these global challenges. What we see is that ecological transition is central to the achievement of decent work and social justice. They all intertwine, and we need to make sure that we don't leave any segment out because the one supports the other. So thank you very much to everyone. We can sign off, and thank you for time. Have a good day, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be. And it's sign off from me and our co-moderator, Archana. Thank you, bye.